everybody. Welcome to the Jerusalem Connection Red Alert report for August 9th. We have with us Shelley Neese, the Jerusalem Connection president, and we love to have Shelley on a couple times a year to discuss topics related to our various projects. In our examination of anti-Semitism and combating it at the university level, Shelley and I discovered a few articles this week that we are going to discuss with you all. Shelley, thank you for joining us this week, and we are glad to have your expertise, as the university system is something that you're not only involved with yourself, but you've got kids that'll end up in universities very soon. And of course, I still teach at universities, so examining how anti-Zionism is an offshoot of anti-Semitism and how it's manifesting the faculty level is important for our network and viewers to know about and understand. So Shelley, welcome.
Thanks. Yeah, no, I feel like always for the last year or so doing Bible Fiber, I have one eye sort of on the modern situation, Israel, and one eye on the 8th century BCE Israel, but there's a lot of overlap there. You know, a lot of the problems are still the same.
They are still the same. And we found a couple of articles just this week regarding the American Anthropological Association, which is basically an inter-university network of anthropology scholars and professors and whatnot. And they are attempting to boycott Israel. What does that mean, Shelley? What does that mean when faculty and departments say we don't want to work with Israel? What does it mean for us? What does it mean for Israel? What does it mean for students?
Yeah, so I looked at, so on the vote, they did vote by a majority to boycott Israel. So they've been working on this since 2014, 2015. So the AAA has been, I guess, an early adapter of the BDS movement, but they've only just now gotten around to this many years later to making that vote official. I think the biggest cause for alarm is that it's not that they're this first scholarly organization to do this, but they are one of the biggest. It's been a lot of identity-based scholarly groups like the I wrote it down, the African Literature Association, the Association for Asian and American Studies, Native American and Indigenous Studies, like those more identity-based scholarly groups boycotted Israel already. But this is a field that isn't on the fringe of academia. This is a field that lots of disciplines overlap with, lots of disciplines engage with anthropology. So I think that's the most disturbing. And that's why there's just been a lot more hand-wringing over this particular boycott. In reality, they are boycotting Israeli institutions, but they say not boycotting Israeli scholars. I don't know how those two can be separated. For the scholars that have come out against this and previous boycotts, you know, if you're a history professor at Dartmouth, or if you're if you're an anthropology teacher at Brandeis, you can't really disassociate from your institution. So it's just, they act like it's not punishing for individual scholars, but I don't think anyone actually believes that. To punish the scholar is to punish the institution and vice versa. So it is really disturbing. I don't know. I've heard different things in terms of how does what a scholarly association and in colleges, how does that trickle down through K through 12? That would be, I was curious to ask you that. How do you feel like this will influence younger ages in education? Because that's what, I mean, I'm also just worried about that.
Yeah, so we've seen that manifesting already. And this idea of Israel being the apartheid state or the colonial oppressor, invader of the land, that has embedded itself with a lot of other sort of pre-CRT, pre-critical race theory notions in the teacher colleges as far back as the 90s. I was in a teacher's college in 93, 94, and I wasn't arguing about Israel issues per se, but I was arguing about that, looking at everything through that lens of race and separating everything out. And what happened was, and I'm going to have a lady named Rebecca on in a few weeks we've talked about this offline. The teachers that are now in our K-12 schools are coming to the classroom with this pre-ingrained bias, this preconceived idea that Israel is bad. Teachers, colleges are producing teachers that are entering the classroom, whether they're teaching English, history, second grade or 10th grade, that are coming with this bias, this notion, this belief system that Jews are just another form of white people, the oppressors, the colonialists, Israel ergo is that. And there's no defense or critical examination, and it can manifest against some of the Jewish students in the classrooms with incidents that we'll talk about in a future Red Alert when I have a woman working very closely with Fairfax County, for example, that the teachers aren't disciplining when bullying or anti-Semitic activities are going on amongst the children. And it's almost easier to get in front of kids and say, look, this is wrong and this is wrong because, but how much harder is it to get in front of the adults in the building and say your entire preconceived notion on this nation, these people, this history of people that they're not even aware of is creating a bias in the classroom. And whoever is in an anthropology class right now or under these faculty members who are just espousing this innately in their lectures, those people, some of them are going to be in our classrooms, and they're going to even be in our Christian school classrooms. And it's really disturbing. So it's already been a generation, right, that have, and I don't think our school teachers even know that they have a bias or a prejudice against Israel that's invalid.
Right. So it's almost as if this isn't just the people writing the curriculum, from an ivory tower. You're saying it also affects just the individual teachers who took an anthropology class for their gen ed and what they learned in that process. So it's not even just anthropology graduates or anything. It's just because this is a general discipline, and anthropology.
Yep. Anthropology is a required class for many humanity liberal art majors, even business majors.
And as it should be. I mean, it's the story of the human experience and studying human civilization across all spectrums. So this blatant politicization of the institution, I think, is what's really disturbing as well. And I looked at the AAA's bylaws, and they directly say in their bylaws that they are not to politicize their organizational objectives. But clearly this is taking a side. I think they justify it because in their eyes, Israel's an apartheid state. And so just as they boycotted South African scholars during apartheid, they're doing the same for Israel. But the end goal, I even watched a couple of your old BDS videos talking about, just the apartheid element of whether or not Israel's an apartheid state. And the end goal for the BDS movement is really disturbing, right? There is no situation where Israel is allowed to still exist. So you can't talk about the BDS movement and boycotting Israel without also wanting to shine a spotlight on what their end goal is, which is not the same as the end goal, ending apartheid in South Africa.
Nobody wanted to make South Africa not exist. They just wanted to improve the conditions for all the inhabitants, not even to mention the fact that what they claim that is our apartheid in Israel, it doesn't exist. And this was interesting. This came out in the last couple of days, but the UN revealed, and it was unpublicized, a couple of outlets picked it up, Lebanon is actually an apartheid state against its Palestinian inhabitants, meaning there are 38 professions that Palestinians are not allowed to go into, including medicine, law, accounting, I mean, 38 of them. So think, if you were a Palestinian living in Lebanon, there's 38 professions you're not allowed to join in. But in Israel, if you're an Arab Israeli woman, no less, you can go all the way through into medical school and be a doctor and have a high position at a hospital. So
it's not the same. And without stating the end goal, it's kind of pulling the wool over people's eyes. If they think that they're boycotting Israeli scholars from being able to publish in their journals is going to
change the condition on the ground for any given Palestinian.
Right. We're not even sure if it was successful in South Africa, but at least the end goal was a little bit more noble in that situation. And so,
and the end goal was to reverse the laws on the books in South Africa, the physical laws on the books that said here is a cordoned off area where a Black person cannot cross into, and there's no such laws in Israel. There's security barriers, but there's security barriers at the borders of many countries. North Korea, Canada,
good countries like good.
Mexico has border walls. I mean, is border
walls doesn't make any sense if Israel doesn't check the boxes of what it means to be an apartheid state, then we can't address the issue as if it's an apartheid state.
Exactly.
But I think that's why it does feel so insulting too with the AAA taking this stance, because they are in a way not the gatekeepers of human rights management, but the definition of a lot of human rights abuses comes through anthropologists looking at this on a large scale
over time.
So it's just a bad look for them in particular to single out Israel as a human rights abuser to the level that they're the only one that they're going to boycott. I mean, that's also that's the problem with the UN. That's the problem with other scholarly organizations who have done this, is singling out Israel for human rights abuses. Either you need to spread that blanket a little further towards all the other human rights abusers in the world, or because that's why, like you said in the intro, that's why this smells like anti-Semitism, because they are just being targeted and singled out in a way that doesn't feel like Israel deserves that sort of spotlight. But
it's the very definition of anti-Semitism, the IHRA definition, which is holding Israel to a double standard. Right? Just holding them, you're not doing this, that, or the other thing, or you are doing this, that, and the other thing. But let's not look at any other country that's engaging in what you claim is that behavior. And then the second idea of that is some of these claims, like it's an apartheid state, are actually inaccurate, right? And then the other blanket of defense that academics and politicians use is that we're not being anti-Semitic because we're not going against Jewish people. They will admit they're anti-Zion, but they say, well, they're going after the state. They're going after the politics. But when your end goal is for this state not to exist, and it's the only state on the planet with a Jewish identity, it's not a theocracy, but how many nations in the Middle East surrounding it would you consider Islamic in their identity? They would admit it themselves. Jordan, Syria, Lebanon. Well, Lebanon was 50-50. Egypt, Morocco, all the UAE, Saudi Arabia.
Right.
They're allowed to have their identity, and some of those are theocracies. But still, even without that, you have a nation. We're considered a Christian nation. Europe, at one point, those nations were considered Christian. You didn't negate them and say, well, they couldn't exist because they were based on their heritage, their religious heritage. But it is what they're saying about Israel. It's exactly what they're saying about Israel.
Even though the Jews are an indigenous population technically in that land. Well, so speaking of all those Middle Eastern countries, it's the Middle East Studies Association also boycotted Israel. It's not as recent of news, but that's my degree. So I graduated from Ben Gurion University with a Middle Eastern Studies degree. And for many years, and throughout the 67 war, throughout the Yom Kippur War, Mesa stayed out of it. The Middle East, they did refuse to even speak about Israel really at the conferences because they didn't want these conferences to be politicized. When I studied Middle Eastern studies in Israel, it was in a open book way of saying, if you're going to study Israel within the Middle Eastern studies context, or in the context of its geography, you really have to do that in Israel, because it's not a part of European studies, but it kind of could be. It's not completely a part of Middle Eastern studies because it is so isolated there culturally, but it also matters because that's its geography. So it's just this complex place to study anyways. But so they went from not discussing Israel at all for fear of politicizing the Israel-Palestinian issue to now it's the main thing that gets discussed, that it's considered the main problem in the Middle East, which is interesting because they're not boycotting Syria. They're not boycotting, like you said, Lebanon's actual apartheid measures. They're just boycotting Israel. And so now it's just this over focus on Israel. Mm-hmm. But I am curious. Yeah. So these are the institutions like these fringe identity organizations or scholarly associations, MESA, AAA. But in general, isn't it the case that at the highest levels, though, like the Association of Presidents of Colleges, they still see a problem with this oppression of free speech, right? That
I hope so. I know, thankfully, George Washington University, GW in DC, just ousted MESA from their campus. They just said, you're no longer allowed to do any of your events here. It doesn't mean any particular professor can't be a part of that organization. Right. They're just saying you lost your privileges for a physical presence on campus, which I think is a good move, even if it's only symbolic, because that doesn't change the belief systems of a lot of those faculty members. And in fact, George Washington has some really strident anti-Israel faculty members, even in the math department and the science department and the government department. And those people, especially the government and studies department, those people go on to be advisors in government, advisors to Congress people or senators, et cetera. And it's pretty frightening. And that absolutely trickles into who ends up in our classrooms, because so many people, or at least it used to be the way, that so many high quality professionals, later in life might turn to teaching as sort of a semi pre-retirement gig or during retirement. And so many of these professors will pop into the Teachers College to teach just some sort of survey class of history or whatever, because gone are the days where our school teachers in general are math majors and math experts who took a few courses on how to teach and then ended up in the classroom. That has flipped. Now you've got math teachers that are only one page ahead of our students in the book because they went an education major. So they're not experts on algebra or anything like that, but they still have the faculty come through the teachers' colleges to give some survey courses. And yeah, there's a lot of teachers that are only a page ahead of the textbook of the kids, right? Especially in K-8.
But that GW example is what I'm hoping for, is just, it's a threat to the freedom, the free exchange of ideas, which is something that is so central to any academic institution. So the hope is that at least on the presidential level, at least at the highest levels, that this is seen as a potential assault on the thing that they value most highly, which is academic freedom and exchange of ideas. Right.
And there have been incidences, I think it was the University of Illinois, where a student went to their professor to get a study abroad approval. I'm not sure it was a full semester. It might have been an opportunity to do something over the summer. And they picked an event in Israel, a scholarly class or course that was taking place on the ground in Israel. And he just needed the sign off that it would be accepted in as the credit or 2 credits or whatever it was. And the professor said, no, you can't, I'm not signing off on that. Pick someplace else to go. Because it was Israel, not because they were going to, dig at pots or study this or that anywhere else. If he would have said Egypt, the guy would have signed it. If he would have said Morocco, the professor would have signed it. But it was because it was Israel. And then that student, I believe, was Jewish, and that had to, they had to go through a whole rigmarole. So what stress does that put on our students, especially our Jewish students or our Christian students who have the same interest of Israel, outside of politics, even just a genuine interest in the archaeology or the anthropology or the history of the region, and then they're getting knocked down out of the desire they have to travel to the region to study, and then they have to go around, and their parents have to get lawyers, and they have to call the dean, and this is very time consuming, all because of some sort of personal political bent an individual professor has against this country, and there go the people. And then that those kind of faculty members start to gain the leadership positions, and that's where you get nervous. Are those presidents and the boards going to hold that line if these types of people with these beliefs filter into those roles as time passes?
I feel like I all the student, the people that we help get scholarships and fund their time at Hebrew University, they're brave students, because maybe a stint at Hebrew University or any Israeli institution can be seen by organizations you don't want to be a part of anyways, but be seen as a stain on your resume. So
right, because we're
here to support them.
Yeah, our scholarship is generally for undergrads, and then if they put that on their resume, their application for grad school, you don't know what the advisors on that grad school admissions department are. How many of those might be from the anthropology department or from the government policy department, who are holding these preconceived beliefs that are not based on fact.
Right.
And
so they might see it as a strike against them. Yeah, that's for sure. And so we'll see. I don't think this is going to help. It's not ever helped any of these scholarly associations. Boycotting Israel isn't. Israel's doing pretty great research in archaeology and anthropology and Middle Eastern studies, and so it is these institutions' loss as well. I mean, Israel is not a small fry in any of these areas of research, and so it breaks my heart for the scholars, the Israeli scholars that might be isolated, not invited to conferences, not invited to speak. But hopefully, in the case of the Middle East Studies Association, there can be new scholarly organizations formed as an alternative. And so
that would be great.
Things go.
There's two things
we'll be their biggest fans.
Yes, we'll be if there's a group of Middle Eastern scholars who break off from MESA in order to create their own, which will have a true critical thinking, let's look at truth and stay on the scholarly realm and stay out of politics, that, we will definitely advertise it and talk about it. And I'll try to interview someone in that movement. The other thing is maybe a group of professors and professionals inside that organization can bubble up and change the tide. I mean, they did vote on it, so you'd have to get the roster out.
There's a lot of people that didn't vote, so we'll see.
Yeah. Well, Shelley, thank you for giving us your time today. I just really wanted to get our viewers sort of aware of this issue as this specific event unfolded in the last few weeks. But at the same time, we've been talking about BDS now for 15 years. And the one good thing we can say is BDS objectives have never yet worked. It damages and trips up a lot of individuals and a lot of individual groups, but Israel remains strong, and the scholars and the students that stay true to their passion for it always seem to come out on their feet, God willing. So
yeah, and it does feel like this might be a small headline. American Anthropological Association, decides to boycott Israel. But to me, these are big things because I always have this haunting feeling of the 1930s all over again. So anything that is isolating and boycotting and keep building walls around Israelis or Jews is something that we as an organization want to highlight, that these are not small headlines for us.
Right. And these small headlines, unfortunately, we've seen in the past, can seem like fringe and then inside 6 years become a majority thought. And that's what we want to stay ahead of and keep people aware of, keep people praying about. We know the end of the story, Israel prevails, but we're going to be on the team that is working towards that and for it constantly without giving up. Amen. Thank you, Shelley. Until next week, until we see you again. Everybody, thanks for joining us, and I will link to those articles in the notes. You can read them at your leisure and be aware of it for your own school systems and universities nearby. Thank you.